Welcome to episode 91 of The Route, presented by White Whale Marketing. The Route is a glorified sports business coffee chat that has a new guest every episode as they share their experiences and route in sports. I'm Christopher Nascimento, and let's get started. As always, just a couple things to cover before we get into today's guest. First off, if you haven't already, follow us on social media at The Route Sports. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see it here on the top corner. And we're on every platform, especially if you're listening. LinkedIn is a great platform for you to potentially connect with us or even just people who are featured on the episode. And it's a great way to kind of begin growing your network or even try to expand it as well. Furthermore, whether you're listening on YouTube, Apple, Google, Spotify, etc., don't forget to subscribe, follow, rate 5 stars, or even just leave a nice comment as the engagement allows us to grow a little bit more. And last but not least, before we get into today's guest, a little thing I want to tell you about, which is Betstamp. So, if you're someone who likes to place a couple bucks on your favorite team, listen up. Don't be a fool like me, where during the season I was only using one sports book, and then at intermission when I was trying to do a little live bet, I'd hear TSN or something like that where they'd share their sponsors' odds and be like, hey, like that's way better than mine. Like I should have looked around a bit more. So the solution is to use Betstamp, where you can compare the best available odds amongst sports books. The only way you're going to get an edge in sports online betting is by having an account with multiple sports books. So if you download the Betstamp app or go to betstamp.app/Ontario, use the code WHALE so you can get access to their affiliates and their prices. Betstamp allows you to verify the existence of a proposed bet with their corresponding odds. This provides you to buy and sell picks with full transparency. Users selling sports picks on Betstamp do not sacrifice any royalties, cut, nothing like that. It's completely free. So again, if you want an edge in sports betting, use Betstamp by downloading their app or visiting betstamp.app/Ontario using the code WHALE to get access to all of their affiliates and their pricing. With that said, we can now get into today's guest, who's actually from Betstamp. So I'd now like to welcome someone from a fast-growing space in the sports world, co-owner and COO of Betstamp, co-host of the Circles Off Sports Betting podcast, and Professional Sports Bettor, Pizzola. Welcome to the Route. How's it going?
I'm doing well, Christopher. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to kind of get into it. So, the way I like to start every single episode, as the name states, the route. So, maybe take us to maybe where you went to school or how you kind of got the passion for sports business, and maybe just take us to how we got here today.
Yeah, so I've pretty much been a sports fan my whole life, and that stems from my upbringing. I'm the oldest of three kids, but my dad put me into all sorts of sports when I was younger, whether it was hockey, soccer, baseball. As I got older, I started playing some volleyball and basketball. So I always had a passion for sports.
Mhm.
And as I was going through high school, sports betting started to become a little bit more prominent in my area, with a lot of my friends getting involved a little bit earlier than I did, mostly through what we would call local bookies, where they just give you an account, you meet up with a guy every week, he'd either pay you or you pay him, and we're talking like really small time stuff at that time. But what I started to notice for many years was I watch a ton of sports, but I can't seem to win betting on sports, and I could never really understand why. Um, and it became very frustrating for me because that was just my biggest passion. I ended up going to the University of Toronto, and there I was studying computer science and applied statistics. And very quickly, I was a horrible student, by the way, because I didn't really, I was never one that cared about the minors or the electives you had to take,
Mhm.
right? I was doing philosophy and sociology and so on and so forth. I didn't really care about those classes. I only cared about what I was interested in. And at that time, it was how can I build something that helps me win at betting on sports? So the statistics side of thing in university was very important to me. In my first year university, I was actually just going to first year, second year, and third year statistics classes, and I really wasn't attending my other classes because that's all I was interested in. And I lost a bunch of money when I was younger, and then eventually over time you come to the realization of like why am I doing this? I'm just continuously losing. If I want to go back and do this again, I have to do it in a form where I'm pretty confident that I'm going to win in the long run. So that's sort of like my story. Out of university, I took a job in sports media. I was working for the Score in Canada at the time. I started as a radio producer there, eventually became a radio host. Eventually, I leveraged my computer science background to move to being the product manager of the Score app. Had loved my time there, got to build out some really cool stuff. But I got to a point where sports betting was my hobby, but eventually I was making more at it than I was at my day job. And you come to that crossroads where it's like, I'm not really balancing either of these very well right now. I like both of them. I have to pick one, and ultimately I chose the sports betting side of things, and that's kind of what led me to where I am now with Betstamp. But I've been a pro bettor for several years now, and I'm just very passionate about the space, and I'm very interested in the space. And obviously now with the regulation that's come in Canada, particularly Ontario, I view that as a pretty big opportunity to build a business in the space as well. So it's kind of been like all over the place type of thing, but and spent definitely more years as a losing bettor than I have as a winning bettor so far. But it's nice to be on the opposite side of things now.
Yeah, no, for sure. I can for sure see that aspect. Yeah. I might be a little bit more in the red at the moment. Actually, no, we don't need to get into that. That's another topic. But that's a great story to kind of get into. Where I already here I have like 4 or 5 different notes I kind of want to get into, but maybe kind of going at it from like, let's say, the beginning of your route. Obviously you're mentioning, I think most people who are in sports, they always had that passion of either playing, being a fan of it, and that's kind of where it started. But I know, at least for maybe my route, like sometimes people throughout the way, professors, etc., they'd be like, oh, maybe keep that as like a passion project or a hobby. So were you ever wavered in that sense, or was it always in your mindset, hey, I'm going to try working towards, sports betting, or kind of building something that could help me win a bit further?
Yeah. So like, I never really thought at any point in life that I could pursue sports in any capacity. Like it's really like, I'm in university, I'm studying computer science and statistics. Don't really know what I want to do coming out of school. And then all of a sudden, at that time, the Score had launched a radio station called Hardcore Sports Radio. It was on Sirius satellite radio. And I used to just call in every day. I'd call in from school and my breaks when I was in my car, because it was just a very different type of programming, which was more centered around sports betting. And naturally, I was just I was very drawn to it. And then like probably 6 months into me calling, I called in one day, and one of the producers I was talking to said, hey, we're short staffed this week. We've got some guys on vacation. Would you be interested in coming in and interning and helping out? And that was like the first, like, oh, I didn't even realize I could possibly get a job in this space. Maybe I could turn this into something. And then from there, it kind of just grew and grew. So it was never, while sports, I should say, was a huge passion of mine, it was never something that I ever considered pursuing in terms of full-time living. And then, I'm working in sports media, and I'm still betting, and I'm starting to refine my models. I'm starting to realize I'm onto something here. And then a light bulb clicks of, why can't I do this as my profession at some point down the road as well? So it's kind of like dumb luck. I never really planned for it to happen, but you come to a realization at some point along the way of like, okay, I never considered this as a possible career path, but why can't it be my career path? Why can't I work towards this? And then you just kind of alter your, the road that you're taking at that point. So never a long-term plan for me, but it's just along the way, I just came to the realization that it was a possibility that I could end up in the space.
Okay, no, that's for sure interesting. So does that mean when you decided to end up going to school for statistics and computer science, was that just something like, hey, I'm going to go to school for this? And because you were saying it wasn't necessarily always about, like, you didn't necessarily know you could have a career in that.
So I was I'm in Ontario. I'm Toronto based, or just outside of Toronto, and I was in what was called the double cohort year for school. And what that means is Ontario used to have a program called OAC, which was essentially a grade 13. When I graduated, the year I graduated, there was no longer going to be a grade 13. So you had 2 sets of students applying for university. grade 12s and grade 13. So I never went to grade 13, grade 12 to university. I had no idea what I wanted to do, like no clue. And my father was an accountant, and I just said, I'm going to take a year of like economics and do a bunch of accounting classes as well, because, worst case scenario, I'll just end up following in my dad's footsteps. He makes a good living. And that's all I really cared about at that time, is like, how can I make a lot of money? So I was like, okay, I did a year of economics and a bunch of accounting classes. Like I said, I absolutely hated it, like couldn't stand it. And I told my parents, I'm like, I'm dropping out for a year to figure out what I want to do. During that year, I played a ton of poker. This was during the poker boom. I was very good at it. I was making a lot of money, but I also was losing a lot of the money I was making on poker, betting on sports. And I also didn't really like poker, 3, 4, 5, 6 months after I was doing it, because I was staring at a computer screen all day long, and it was just like too taxing. So I said, I'm going to go back to school. I'm going to do what I was good at. And when I was in when I was in high school, I was so good at like computer programming at that time for my age that I was basically teaching my classes in grade. I knew more than the teacher that was teaching me. To the point where they would, they would actually get me up and be like, okay, you already know how to do this. Just walk around and help other people figure it out, type of thing. So I said, I'll go back to school and I'll do that, because I was getting hundreds, basically 99 every year in computer programming. I like the stats side of things because of sports. So I'm like, okay, look, I'm just going to put these together. These are things I want to do. So that's how I got into that space. But and then I very quickly found out that it's university. Like they want to broaden your knowledge. You have to take a bunch of classes that you're not going to necessarily be interested in. And I was never the type of guy that could really do that. So, but that's sort of the story in terms of I never really had any clue what I wanted to do. And that's been the case for the majority of my life, to be quite honest. I've never really known until I've just gotten in the position and said, okay, now I figured it out, type of thing.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. And I find a lot of people could probably relate to that. And even just myself, where you're saying how your dad is an accountant. Same with mine, right? Where maybe because that's your upbringing, you're like, hey, like this is a pretty good life. Like he seems to enjoy it. Okay, that's what I'm going to do as well. And then a lot of times I find, whether it's myself, guests, or even just people I speak to, it's very rare that someone goes to uni, school, or coming out of high school and they're like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And that's what happens, right? Like, oh, I don't know. Let me just pick something. Usually maybe something related to what your parents did. And once you're in there, you're like, oh, like this isn't for me whatsoever. So that's pretty interesting to hear, even just how you kind of came about that.
Sorry to cut you off. Like I think about my wife, right? My wife went to vet school to be veterinarian because she absolutely loves animals. Like, and to this day, I still have a dog. I have a tortoise. I've had all sorts of pets because my wife loves animals so much. But she very quickly learned and graduated as a veterinarian. Well, your day to day is not necessarily, you're dealing with animals, but there's a lot of bad things. Like you're putting animals down a lot of times, and so she very quickly hated it. And it's very difficult. A lot of people don't think of the true nature and the full 360 scope of what a job entails. And she can deal with animals every day, but she's got to deal with people too. A lot of people who are upset because their animals are sick, or dealing with sick animals and stuff like that. So I've always found that, and I've been particularly bad at that over the course of my life, is just you think you're getting into one thing, and then you sit down and you start to do it, and you're like, oh, this is kind of miserable. I don't really enjoy it. And luckily, I've been able to quickly jump ship from things here to there. But a lot of people are not afforded that opportunity, unfortunately.
For sure. No, I completely agree with all that. And I guess before we kind of get into how you kind of got in with the score and kind of just building on that a bit further, you have any, because a lot of the people listening are, people entering university, particularly interested in sports business, or young professionals as well, where maybe sometimes they're like, hey, like I didn't know sports was a career. Hey, I end up hating my career now. I want to switch over. Or they're even trying to figure out like what my niche would end up being, let's say. I know you're saying how you kind of came about it, where you're calling this radio station, for 6 months, and they're like, hey, like, do you want to come help us? Do you have any maybe tips for people on how to maybe, get that 360 scope a bit further, or is it just maybe just sitting down and thinking about it?
Yeah, I think definitely I never really put much thought into it for
Mhm.
sure. So I think just taking a step back, probably leveraging maybe a platform like LinkedIn where you can speak to other people who are in the field, do some networking, attend events, ask people about what they like and don't like about their jobs, right? Because obviously I know people who love, I have friends that are, in all sorts of professions now. One of my best friends, a civil engineer. He absolutely loves his job, but
Mhm.
as he describes it to me on a daily basis, I'm like, well, this is an absolute nightmare for me. I could never do this. So you really have to understand what that day to day is going to entail. But yeah, it's tough. I, listen, everybody, you do your own research, you talk to as many people as you can, you get as good advice as you can. For me, I definitely think taking a break between high school and university would have been a much better option for me than what I actually did, and forcing myself just to get a post-secondary education for the sake of getting one. And nowadays, I think like if you don't know what you want to do, take a break, work in the field, and maybe you'll find some sort of passion or something that you
Yeah.
like. I don't think it's mandatory anymore. I also think a lot of businesses are much more open to hiring people who don't have a post-secondary education nowadays. But I truly believe if you're passionate enough about something and you work hard enough at it, you can get to that point. Now, there's obviously exceptions. Like you're not going to be a lawyer, for example, or a
Yes.
doctor without going to, like, those are prerequisites for some jobs. But you can carve out your own niche. You can carve out your own business. You can do all sorts of things nowadays. So I think like don't be a. For me, it was like all my friends are going to university. Like, how can I take a year off? I'm going to be behind them, right? They're all going to
Yeah.
graduate university, and I'm going to be behind them. And it was a bad way of thinking. And like life is not a race. I think it's kind of like maybe it's very cliche, but it's true. I think it's way more important to find something that you enjoy, and
Mhm.
something that you're more positive about, like more certain that you want to go down that path rather than just forcing yourself into something.
Yeah, no, I for sure agree with all that. And then I guess kind of getting more back into your route specifically about that. So you're saying how you kind of came about it, like, hey, like we need some help this week, and then you kind of just started, snowballing from there. So how did that kind of grow when you're also kind of, what is it, balancing like your sports betting side? Where you're still trying to master that side of it as well.
So I was lucky because I was able to do both at once. So I
Okay.
went into a culture that embraced sports betting, and that's what drew
Mhm.
me to hardcore sports radio and the Score at the time. They were very different from a more traditional sports media company like TSN or Sportsnet at that time, and that they were embracing it. So I went into a culture where everybody around me was a better as well. So I didn't have to hide that, which was
Mhm.
great. But yeah, it was. I never really felt like I had to perform any sort of balancing act, which was very helpful for me. Like I could be at work and I could be looking at the board and what I wanted to bet on that specific night, and that was actually considered part of my job, which is very weird to say. But I needed to be in tune with everything that was going on in the sports betting world in order to prepare my hosts for their shows, and at some point in order to prepare myself for the shows. So I
Mhm.
was lucky that I found that culture that was just a perfect fit for me. Like, it honestly could not have crafted a work environment which was more perfect, where I was surrounded by fellow bettors, a lot of hardworking people, passionate about what they do. And yeah, like I said, I mean, a lot of my life can be just chalked up to luck, but I did work hard at that job, and like I said, I was an intern there, but when my internship came up, the host went to bat for me, right? We
Mhm.
need to hire Rob. We need to get him on payroll. We need to do this and that. So, but luckily enough that it was just like the perfect environment for me.
Yeah, no, no, for sure. And then I think you're kind of mentioning at the beginning as well, where you almost hit like a crossroads, right? Where your sports betting was kind of overtaking the earnings you're making from the actual position you had at the Score. What kind of maybe gave you the confidence, or what did you end up kind of going to do after the Score specifically?
Right. So when my career at the Score was, I was getting paid peanuts when I first started. Right. Like I
Yeah.
said, I was interning for a long time. I was then offered part time work. Then I was offered full time work. The full time work was basically like the salary was basically at the poverty line. But
Oh,
I was so just like happy to have been offered something. I love that job so much that I was like, okay, I'm going to take it. Eventually, after a couple years, you're like, well, I'm making really no money. I need to do some sort of pivot here. And at that time, the Score was launching their mobile app. Um, and I applied for an operations manager position within that, and I got that role. So I left radio, and I luckily left it almost right in time because about 6 months later, the Score scrapped the radio side of their business, which was not bringing in any revenue. So I was still there. I was doing my day to day. I was betting as part of that. Like I said, like the Score was a betting culture. They embraced betting. We did like Score mobile picks at the time, where I was filming segments with other people who were giving out picks that we would post in the app and so on and so forth. But what I said before is a little bit misleading. So at that time, I was betting, but daily fantasy had become a huge thing. And I was always into fantasy sports. So naturally, I embraced it. DraftKings came into market, FanDuel came into market. I was making a ton in the early days of DraftKings and FanDuel daily fantasy. And one of the projects I was working on for the Score was a daily fantasy app. So I was very interested in this. I'm like, this is great. I play every day. I can tell you what I love and what I don't like about the sites that I play on. I'll build out something that's way better, which is great. But the Score then instituted an internal policy saying that once we launch this daily fantasy product, employees are no longer going to be able to play daily fantasy on any sites that are out there, because they didn't want us as employees to be able to leverage the data that we had and use it on other sites. They thought that this was a conflict of interest, could in the public eye, would not be, would be frowned upon. So I basically got that email. I stared at my computer for 10 minutes of saying, okay, I'm going to have to make a choice here. I'm going to have to pick one or the other. I actually sat down with the CEO of the Score and his son, who's Benji, who's the COO. And I told the guys, I'm like, I don't want to leave this job, but I'm making more playing DFS than I am with this job. And is there any leeway here? Like, could we figure something out? And they're just like, we can't make exceptions. And I said, I'm going to talk it over with my wife tonight. And I resigned the next day, given my 2 weeks notice the next day. And I, my wife was very supportive at the time. She said, just go for it. Let's see if we can figure out a way to do this. And luckily, I mean, that was one of the best decisions I ever made. So I was kind of painted into a corner. I never really I did have to make a tough decision, because ultimately I had to give up one of the two. But it was not, had that company-wide email not went out to me, I don't know what my future would have held. I don't know if I would have been able to balance both, or if I would have had the stones to quit my full-time job, because it's very tough to just say, I'm giving up a 6-figure job here to bet. Like, and imagine telling that to your parents and my in-laws and my friends, and they don't understand. They think they think that there's like a degenerate component to it, right? Oh, you can't make money doing this. You can't, but it's not. I mean, at that point, I had understood that what I actually was doing was an edge, but definitely one of the toughest decisions. I knew deep down what I was going to do right away. I knew I was going to resign, but to actually go through with it and think it through and get the support of people around you to make that decision was tough in such a short period. But ultimately, pretty happy with the way that turned out.
Yeah, no, I bet, like, it's almost like you're saying, right? You never would have had that crossroads to even kind of maybe consider both, because, hey, like, you're kind of almost like playing it safe because you have the job, you're also doing it on the side. But then when they kind of force it in front of you, you're like, okay, like, now I actually need to think, even though it's been in the back of your mind. So, no, that's for sure. Like, just a crazy thing to even think about. But I'm glad to see it's been working out, and clearly it is. So, do you mind maybe kind of sharing with us, like, how that transpired afterwards and how we got to kind of Betstamp today?
Yeah. So I quickly learned that the edge that I had in DFS was not going to last forever. So I unfortunately quit my job probably at the peak of the amount of money I was making at DFS. And within 6 months, 12 months, the edge was decreasing big time. And that was because other players were getting smarter. And that was because there was way more content sites that were launching that were providing valuable information to people that weren't out previously. So at that point, I'm like, okay, now we're getting into, yeah, I can make a living off of this, but it's not a great living. Um, I have to figure out a way to make more money, or else I'm going to go back and just take a day job somewhere. And I knew the score would have taken me back had I wanted to go back, but there would
Yeah.
also would have been I don't know what the word I'm looking for here, but almost like an embarrassment on my part to have to go and ask for my job back. I didn't really, that would have been a last resort for me. So I was like, okay, I'm going to pivot from DFS now into actually trying to be a full-time sports bettor.
Yeah.
And again, I talk about how so much of um, my success is just dumb luck, but I had a pretty large Twitter following at that time, which I had built from my days in the score of being a radio personality. And I just used to post my baseball picks onto my Twitter account every single day. Just publicly, you guys want to bet on baseball? Here's what I'm betting. And I got a random DM one day from somebody who said, hey, see you're posting your baseball picks. You interested in having a chat? I said, sure. So I got a call from a guy who was US based, who basically said to me, hey, listen, I also bet on sports. Whenever you're betting or posting your picks publicly every day, someone is going out and betting those plays, and they're moving the entire market. So you have something that's very valuable, probably don't even realize how valuable it is, and somebody else is taking advantage of it for free, and it's affecting my ability to bet on the games as well because it's moving the whole market. So how about you come work with me in some capacity? We negotiated some sort of deal, but that's when I first joined on with a larger group to bet on baseball at the time. And then that eventually evolved into other sports, which were football and hockey, and led to other opportunities. But had that, I never received that random DM one day from some guy on Twitter who wanted to talk to me, I would have never really gained an in with more professional bettors. And at that time, I thought I knew way more than I actually did. So it was actually the greatest learning experience for me to work alongside other pro guys, develop a model, be able to bet risk free at that time because of the deal that I negotiated. And that just kind of allowed me to build the bankroll and my confidence level to where I needed it to be because I didn't really understand how valuable the stuff that I was doing actually was at that time. So just a random DM from a guy who happened to notice that people were betting my baseball picks was what set the wheels in motion to actually continue doing this full time at a large scale.
Yeah, no. That's interesting for sure. And in regards to that Twitter following, right, that kind of catapulted this whole, um, you know, action to kind of transpire. Was that just from people like enjoying your picks and people kind of starting to gradually follow more and more, or like how did that Twitter following kind of come about?
It was a combo of things, but I did some TV in Canada, so definitely that helped getting my face out there, getting my name out there a lot more. I did write a weekly NFL picks article for the Score, which was their most heavily viewed article on a weekly basis as well. So all those things contributed for sure. But one thing about the betting space is if you are posting public picks that are winning, people are going to find you and you will build a following. So I had a very good MLB season and people found me. And then what I've learned over the years is the following that I have is very engaged with what I'm doing. I do a weekly Sunday morning NFL preview video stream, 11 a.m. every Sunday during NFL season. I have 33,000 followers on Twitter. I'm going to get about 10,000 followers on that stream, the unique followers. So like a third of my following is engaged with what I'm doing. And that kind of, it has its pros and its cons because I have open DMs. I have people reaching out to me all the time. And there's a large portion of people who are always just asking me what to bet on, right? What are these picks? And that's kind of what led me into the Betstamp side of things is that I want other people to win betting on sports, right? it frustrates me when I see my friends losing, people that are close to me lose betting on sports, because it's actually way easier to win than people realize. The problem is people generally are looking for the wrong things. They're looking strictly maybe for someone to tail, so on and so forth, rather than just understanding the basic things that you can do to transform yourself, maybe not necessarily into a winning bettor overnight, but even a coin flipper, which is like, okay, you expect to break even in the long run. So with the Betstamp product, and why I wanted to really get involved with that is because it was a product I was using on a daily basis, but it was a way for me to leverage my following as well and say, I'm very passionate about this product. This is a way that you can win without having to ask me to post my picks on a daily basis. Like, everyone can kind of figure out their own process and figure it out for themselves by using one simple app. So that was what I was passionate about. And yeah, it's so far it has alleviated a lot of the pain point for me on a daily basis of, hey, Rob, what should I bet on? What should I do? And focusing more on education rather than just picks content. I think I'm way more passionate about that. I enjoy that way more. Being able to, we hire Betstamp employees, for example. We have people in our office who joined as losing bettors, who are now winning bettors in the course of 6 months. That to me is the greatest honor in the space, that someone is willing to listen to what I have to say. And in doing so, they've been able to transform themselves into somebody who's going to win in the long run. And it really is that easy. And I've been able to, to leverage my following to grow the product, which has been nice as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think for those listening, I'm sure they'd kill me if I didn't ask. So what are these basics that kind of can help people kind of transform their betting ways?
So you hit the biggest one in the intro that you did for the podcast, right? And people are price sensitive in their day-to-day lives.
Yeah.
I'm Ontario based. The price of gas is $2 a liter now, right?
Yeah.
If you had a gas station across the street from you that was $1.70 a liter instead of $2, you're going to go and fill up there. Everyone would go and fill up there. That's what people do. When, people see something on sale, they buy it because it's a good price. But for some reason or another, this concept never made its way into sports betting. And price sensitivity is huge. If you can bet a team at -110 instead of -120, if you're betting $100 and you lose that bet, you're going to lose $10 less. Okay, you're not going to win more, but you're going to lose $10 less. On the other side of things, if you can bet a team at +120 instead of +110, you throw down $100 on that game. When you win that bet, you're going to win $10 more. And all of these things add up over time. So in order for you to have the greatest chance of success in the sports betting space, you want to have as many different places to bet as possible, because that's going to give you the best chance to find the best line, plain and simple. So now I understand not every single bettor out there can afford to put money into 20 different sports books like I can. But even going from one sports book to 3, or from 3 to 5, and just being able to reduce the vig that you're betting into, it makes a massive difference over the long run. And for people who don't know, the vig is basically where the book has the edge, right? The book's not letting you bet for free. They're charging you a premium to bet, usually 10 cents on both sides. So by reducing that 10 cents on both sides to 5 cents or 3 cents, or even in some places, if you're betting at so many sports books, you can actually find what's called an arbitrage, or an arb, where you can guarantee yourself money by betting the opposite side of both games. And that's just basically taking advantage of what the market is offering you. So that's it's a pain to sign up for sports books sometimes. Sometimes it's a pain to manage these sports books. And that's what the Betstamp app does. That's the reality of the situation. And that's why it was built. And that's why it's such a great utility. But you have to be price sensitive. If you have one sports book and you're continuously betting into that one sports book, it is so hard to win. I'm not saying it's impossible. There are people that can do it, but it's so hard. Now, just by adopting, like I said, even a handful of books And whenever, it doesn't matter who you want to bet on. If you just say to yourself, I like the Blue Jays today, I'm betting the Blue Jays, and you just find the sports book that's giving you the best price, you've cut the odds maker's edge down big time. And if you're close to being a winning bettor and you're on the cusp and you're just like break even over time, just by line shopping, you've made yourself a winning bettor now, just by being price sensitive. So that's by far the biggest one that I can recommend. I practice what I preach. I literally bet wherever I can bet. I have so many sportsbook accounts that I have to like. Sometimes it's impossible to keep track, but it's actually so important to get the best price. It's so important, and I can't stress that enough.
Yeah, for sure. It's almost like, let's say like investing or finance, right? For those who are listening or that are in business, like compounding that minimizes your risk but maximizes your reward, right? And then those $10 that you don't lose, or those extra $10 that you gain, and just allowing it to compound just allows you to grow a bit more. So no, I've been doing it now too ever since I've signed up with Betstamp, and it has helped. Especially, I think it was game one, if I'm not mistaken, Florida versus Tampa, where Tampa was the underdog, and then just hitting all the ones where the odds were better. It made a big difference for sure. So I definitely see that aspect where it's already helping myself. Yeah, and then maybe if you want to, maybe one of the last things we kind of get into before we kind of wrap up and ask kind of these two final questions I'd like to ask everyone. You mind maybe getting into your podcast a bit more, considering this is a podcast as well, maybe just chatting about that and yeah.
Okay, so Circles Off is people might not understand what the name Circles Off means. It's in reference to one of the world's largest sports books is called Pinnacle. They're a UK sports book primarily, but usually in the mornings you would wake up and next to a game you would see what's a red circle, and that means that there's a limit on the game, usually a low limit, and you would wait as a pro bettor. You're waiting for that circle to come off or to disappear, and that indicates to you that the limits have gone up on that game. You can bet way more, and it becomes like the frenzy in the market. It's like the opening bell, I guess, if you're in the stock market or something like that. So that's what Circles Off is in reference to. But it's a sports betting educational podcast. It has some novice concepts. It has some more advanced concepts. We interview some guests, whether they're in the content space, other pro sports bettors. I think we're very close to 60 episodes now. We've been doing it for just over a year. But I would highly recommend, if you are looking to get into the space, you want to understand some more sports betting concepts, things that will help you win. It's a pretty good, easy listen. I co-host it with Johnny, who is a co-founder of Betstamp as well. But we have a good time with it on a weekly basis. And now we're doing video, so we're on YouTube on the Betstamp channel as well. But mainly sports betting educational. We try to have some fun with it because there's obviously only so many topics you can cover in the sports betting space. But we do Q&As with listeners, and we've had such a diverse list of people that we've interviewed over the past few months as well. Where I even learn stuff when I'm interviewing other people as well, which I think is the sign of a good interview. So yeah, check it out. You can check it out anywhere where you would stream audio, mainly Spotify, iTunes, but YouTube as well if you want to watch the video on the Betstamp channel.
Yeah, no, that's good stuff for sure. And I agree with that completely, right? Where these podcasts, I like to say sometimes, if no one listens, I have this notebook. That's why I'm always looking down, writing all these different notes. As long as it's value to me and hopefully the guest too, then that's how there's maybe something you're onto something. So yeah, that's perfect. And hopefully people check that out. And finally, the two last questions I like to ask every single guest, because I think it's just kind of fun to do it. I like to always say I'm going to live until I'm 103 years old. So if we kind of fast forward when 103-year-old Rob is on his rocking chair, just thinking back to his career so far, what's maybe a story or experience that's going to stand out? Or like, wow, I can't believe I got to do that for a living.
Yeah, that's a good question. I won't live to 103. I know that. I'm type 1 diabetic, and I'm glad I won't live to 100 because I don't know that I could at that point.
Yeah.
Once I can't golf anymore, please take me. Please take me. But yeah, I mean, I've listen, for me, this is, I mean, it's not really all that interesting, but the amount of travel that I've been able to do just to connect with people all over the world in the betting space and the amount of different places that I've been able to see, that to me is what I always think back on and what I always remember. I've been to places all over the world that are just, breathtaking, different spots that I like. When I was younger, I would be like, oh, I'm never going here. I was raised in an Italian family. I'm only used to like Italian food. Like I was raised in a very Italian community. I never would have expected it, but I've got to see a lot of the world. So I will definitely look back on, spending Super Bowls with friends in Costa Rica, for example, just, watching the Super Bowl there, just being able to travel, see different places, met a friend in Iceland where we did like a 14-day trip around the entire country, which was just like disconnected from the world for 2 weeks, which was nice. So those are the things that stick out in my head is basically the travel. And even when when I sit back and I reflect on a lot of stuff, a lot of my best memories are just like not at home, just abroad, stuff that I will only do once in my life, but I was just happy that I was able to do those things.
Yeah, no, that sounds amazing. And yeah, I've been to Iceland too, and it almost seems like a movie, right? Where it's almost like I don't know, it's hard to explain, right? Because it's so different to some of the landscape you're used to seeing.
Once you get out of Reykjavik, you see more sheep than you see people for your entire trip. That's not an exaggeration, but yeah, I enjoyed it quite a bit. And you're right, it's unlike anything. And depending on where you are, and that's why it's so cool to drive Ring Road around the entire country, is because the landscapes are so different, right? You'll get to a place, you'll get to a place within an hour drive, and you'll be like, I can't believe where I am right now. Like this feels surreal. So pretty cool spot. I would highly recommend anyone do that. It's especially if you need a break, just relax, disconnect. It's the spot in my opinion.
No, for sure. I absolutely agree. It's funny that you're saying the thing about sheep because my parents are from Portuguese islands, just kind of south of Iceland. It's kind of a mix between Iceland, Hawaii, kind of interesting little mix like that. My dad's island, I think, has 30,000 cows and 6,000 people. So I always find that funny, and just hearing the sheep thing just reminded me of that. But the last question I'd like to ask, so we went into the future, now going into the past. If you were to, let's say, sit down with 16, 18-year-old Rob, or let's say someone entering university, you're kind of trying to figure out what they're going to do next, what's one piece of advice that you wish you knew that maybe you'd like to share?
Not necessarily that I wish I knew, but I wish I had this outlook instead.
Okay.
So I would say to people, just be open-minded. I think it's very easy for somebody, especially at that age, especially me at that age, to think you know everything. And you'll have people who are way more experienced in a certain field or just have a different outlook on life, or who will give advice that I was very quick to dismiss at that time. And I was way too close-minded an individual, even through my 20s. Probably not till recently have I taken an outlook of, I'm really going to absorb all this information. Like, use all the information that's available to you. This is what I do in sports betting. Absorb it and then figure out what you're going to do with that. And I think just being able to process all these things, being open-minded about things, it really has changed my perspective on life a lot more. It's really allowed me to be just a better individual and to take step forwards. You get to a point where I think it doesn't really matter what you're doing. Doesn't matter what profession, what hobby, whatever you want to improve at. You get to a point where you kind of stall, and it's a lot of times self-inflicted, just because you think you have it all figured out. You think that there's no room for improvement. What you're doing is perfect. And really just being open-minded, absorbing information, I think can get you a lot farther and get you to a lot higher peak or ceiling. So that's definitely when I think back to when I was a teenager. If I could slap myself in the face and said, listen to the people who are talking to you rather than thinking you know everything, that's what I would have said.
Yeah, no, that's great. And that's why I like to ask that question last, because I find it just wraps it up well. And yeah, definitely something I'm writing down all these things as well. But unless you have anything else you'd like to share, really appreciate you coming on the podcast. And obviously, if anyone wants to follow Rob, you can see his Twitter handle there. But yeah, unless there's anything else, thank you for coming on, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Anyone out there who's listening or watching, give me a follow on Twitter. If you ever have any sports betting questions, I leave my DMs open for a reason. You can reach out to me anytime. any sort of advice, just basic questions, I'm there to answer. And I will be, trying to get back to you as quickly as possible. And then obviously, if you just want an easy listen, whether you're driving into work or you're exercising or whatever, do check out Circles Off. If you're interested in the sports betting space, I'm biased, obviously, but I definitely think it's one of the best sports betting podcasts out there. And we've really carved out a niche where it's more evergreen content. Like you can listen to an episode from a year ago and still find a lot of value in it, where it just doesn't get dated in a week or anything like that. So check it out.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And that's a wrap on episode 91 of The Route.